Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty. I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn, Courtney Staples, and Christopher Prunty. On today's episode, we have a new prompt from listener Kaiser. You might remember his name from our Battle Train series, and we have a pseudo sequel in today's prompt, which sounds a little bit like this. Kaiser wants us to build what is essentially a water world with World War I/World War II naval technology. He also wants the setting to be somewhat realistic with no magic, and the conflict is between several factions that we will come up with that are fighting over something, which we will also come up with. When it comes to weapons, he says, please stick to conventional methods, so no solar ray guns, and there are only humans, so no giant aphids and no dwarves. I swear I did not personally add that in there. That's in the prompt that you can read. Everyone here agrees. He would also like for us to create a flagship for at least one of the factions, and I think that we can do that. Remember that if you want us to build your world, like we're building Kaiser's here, you can go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, and you can click on the little button that says submit a prompt, and we will build your prompt live on the podcast. You can always email us and tell us how great we're doing over at worldbuildwithus@gmail.com. You can also tweet at us at Let's Worldbuild, or you can join our community on Discord, or if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always give us money over on Patreon. Link for all of those in the descriptions. So, with all of the preamble out of the way, who wants to start us off with a tenet?
One question here. Doesn't he also mention that cybernetics are okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Transhumanism is okay.
I see.
I'm curious as to how that tracks when we're only doing World War I and II tech.
Sounds like he has a little hole in his battleship.
Okay. I'm already very curious to see where you're going with this, Daniel. So start us off here.
And so my tenet is, as a result of the post-apocalypse, only a select few understand the workings of these technologies, and the knowledge they have is wrapped up in religious mystery.
Okay, that sounds pretty cool. I like that already. So you're essentially saying that the tech that fuels a lot of this is essentially guarded by techno priests, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay, understood.
The Mechanicum.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Nice. I like that name.
And I can already see the clear line that you're going to be taking with the transhumanism aspect. So, all right. Chris, what was your second tenet?
Honestly, though, I'm surprised Daniel didn't go with Battleship Girls, but I also understand his hatred of anime. My tenet was going to help reconcile the fact that airships would decimate battleships. I want there to be some sort of constant prevailing dust storms or shards in the air that just makes airplane impractical.
Oh,
So
nice.
I actually have the exact same tenet, except it's really hard to do dust storms when there's no physical land. So
that's what I was trying to... Like, you could still have land. The land is just inhospitable. Like,
right.
No one can live there.
I had it so the ecosystem is racked with constant, powerful windstorms that make flying airplanes incredibly dangerous. So much like you, I feel like in order to square the kind of idea that we're only dealing with ships as opposed to airplanes, we have to take airplanes out of the equation somehow. And I had just like incredibly powerful windstorms that would basically shear the wings off of planes that just kind of come up randomly, you know?
If you did it at the fact that this is post-apocalyptic, you could have that maybe the debris and detritus of other things that are super light and super thin just get picked up from the ocean and then turn into a razor-like storm.
So you're saying that Sharknadoes are canonical in the setting?
Yes.
I think that's what you're going after.
No. It's scientifically based.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do want to try and push back against Sharknadoes because
No,
there's
no,
no magic. So if you can come up with a scientific reason for Sharknadoes to exist, I would love to hear it.
Razor storms, I think, it's like a storm of shark teeth.
Yeah.
That's the tagline for it's like Deathbed, the bed that eats people.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
you could have the whatever land masses still exist are really just piles of metal rubble from some post-apocalyptic war, and these storms lift the rubble up and create these horrific, hurricanes of metal and steel.
So I like the idea of them being rust storms. So it can be like, it could also jam long range communications as well because of these shards of metal that are in the storms as well. Plus, because rust can crumble and become dusty, I think that we can actually square the dust storms that Chris had come up with as well. So I think that is a really good point. Also, do want to point out that nowhere in the prompt does it say anything about post-apocalypse, but I like how all of our brains simultaneously this has to be a post-apocalyptic situation, because what else would it be?
I mean, he did specify essentially Waterworld, and Waterworld was a post-apocalyptic movie, so
right. But I hear you, but at the same time, Waterworld doesn't necessarily have to be post-apocalyptic. We could have created a Waterworld where the ships are just World War I and World War II tech. It's I hear you, but at the same time,
it
not
makes
necessarily
narrative sense because I don't see how you could somehow be stalled at World War I or II tech, and then also have, if this is the Earth, and also have a ecological situation where we only have water left without something going dramatically wrong.
And if you want cybernetics and everything, it allows for certain advancements in other areas and certain stagnation in others.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to make sure that we're squaring that concept as well, because it's nowhere within the prompt is it explicitly post-apocalyptic. So because Chris basically did one of my tenets, I had to back up just in case. And because of these powerful windstorms, I actually wanted to make it so wind energy is actually a really big and prominent thing. Because when you have constant windstorms, whether they be rust, dust, or otherwise, I think that harnessing the wind and creating some kind of electro tech is a natural progression for where we want to go. Granted, it's not really like World War I/II tech. However, we had windmills, and I imagine that we can have these just be like updated World War II windmills, that type of thing, not necessarily full on turbine energy, but still.
So we're harnessing the storm energy.
We are, yes. Just like in our Ride the Lightning, we're harnessed it. So we're riding the lightning in the train setting. We need a cool, like, surfing the wind type situation over here, but like cooler than that, obviously. We'll have to come up with that come part 2, I'm sure.
No, I think that's cool, because then you can, like, you've created another sort of resource beyond what I imagine is gasoline.
Right. Because
we have nuclear power?
Yeah, like gas, coal, and nuclear are all like fairly limited. But again, you have so much wind at your disposal, like with these constant windstorms. It only makes sense that people are going to be like, we should do something with all this wind, right? Like it seems like a natural conclusion to where we would want to go with it. And speaking of natural, we have a natural segue to Courtney's tenet. Courtney, what is your tenet going to be?
So it's going to need some reconciliation with your wind power tenet, but I had in mind, in the prompt, Kaiser brought up that the factions are fighting over something that we have to come up with. And I was thinking, since fuel is going to be so valuable for ships, basically a giant oil rig fortress in the ocean, which maybe that's like the sort of home of one of the more powerful factions that others are trying to get at. But I could also see it housing some of that wind wind turbines that you were talking about, and also being potentially like a major hub for trade, sharing of knowledge, that sort of thing, and probably protection from those horrible windstorms or the rust storms.
Okay, so your tenet, just to be clear, is the thing that we're fighting over is this base, correct?
Yes. Yep. Correct.
Okay. All right. I don't know what it is with this tenet, or maybe it's just really limited, or maybe I'm just really just kind of basic. But my second tenet, besides the other one that I had as a backup, is actually the thing all of these factions are fighting over is not resources. So I think that squares. I think that definitely can work. I think that we should give it some additional meaning or some additional value outside of it's just a city that everyone wants, right?
Just thinking, I mean, we talked about how the storms would be interrupting long-term communications. Maybe this place has like some extremely powerful radar or radio, something to that effect, where it can still communicate out during these storms.
That's actually kind of interesting because it implies like, okay, if anyone's seen The Warriors, we all know the importance of like that radio DJ, as they're giving information out over the airwaves. I like the idea that this is the one place that has a radio that's powerful enough for half of the world or most of the known world to know it. Because one, you control information, you control, propaganda, and you control entertainment as well, which is actually really huge,
Yeah, and that's something that kind of gets ignored a lot of the time in world building, as far as like what people do as hobbies or what they do when they're not, I don't know, working or what have you.
Oh, totally agreed. I mean, the fact that like everyone in all assumed worlds are basically always gritting their teeth and adventuring or like fighting in a war, and none of them are having any fun is absolutely something that comes up in world building. Like, yeah, I agree with that entirely. I was also think that if Daniel has that kind of religious bent, there could be some kind of religious aspect to it as well, but we might want to keep those separate. I don't know. Does anyone have an additional tenet that might track with what we're going with so far?
I just had a question. Is this location stationary?
I had it in mind that it was like maybe it had been built as an oil rig previously, but it's been slowly kind of warped over time to be this multi-purpose thing. So yeah, stationary.
That's actually particularly interesting in a world where like there is constant like waves and movement and everything like that. The idea that there is a fixed point compared to the rest of the world is also pretty interesting. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is basically the magnetic equivalent of north, right? Like where you are is all dependent based on where you are in relation to this particular point.
So you're saying it's like become a new pole?
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
We could even call it Polaris if we wanted to go that route.
Neat. Isn't that the North Star?
Yeah.
See, now you say this, and I know it's supposed to be about the ships and everything, but now I just want to build Polaris as a city more than anything else. But
what if it was a flagship?
But it's a stationary, like permanently moored or permanently.
Yeah, like maybe it was a flagship and they built it into a base. That way we could do the flagship thing with people on it.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's a great way to reconcile.
Could be stuck on a sandbar or the most shallow part.
I don't think it'd be a sandbar because the tides would move and shift the sandbar eventually. But I like the idea that it's kind of grounded on something. That's kind of interesting. Oh.
I mean, we still could stick with the oil rig idea, but over time, like they grafted stuff to it, kind of like the sort of ocean city in the Scar by China Mayville.
Ooh.
Yeah, I had that in mind as well. Actually, yeah. I don't know why I like the idea that this ship has run aground on the top of a mountain, or like that's how it started. Because it needs something to kind of build a foundation around, right?
Hmm.
because otherwise, why would it stay in a particular position? Like, what's keeping it there with all of the tides and with everything else that's going around, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Okay, we've got a lot. We've got a great framework so far. Who has tenets left that they want to tell us about?
Mine I have, but I want it to also not be universal that everyone's doing it
Okay.
because it's seen as a bit of a taboo.
Oh, okay.
I want it to be with the transhumanistic aspect of it, that there's certain people who are integrating themselves into the systems of the ship itself.
Interesting.
Okay.
So you're so dedicated to your ship or anything that you effectively become one of the gun emplacements or something.
So like a cybernetic connection. Do you see them as grafted into the ship, or they're like connecting themselves to it cybernetically?
I see it as cybernetically. Like there could even be like a hub where they're all kept, or I think strategically it would make more sense to spread it out throughout the ship. This way, there's not like one area you want to aim for.
Hmm.
Mm. So what would this look like? Okay, so you said you wanted to keep it taboo, right?
Yeah.
So what about it is taboo? Why is it taboo? And what can we do to explore that kind of relationship?
You're losing a lot of your individuality, for one. I feel like it is absolutely permanent, and if you try and break out of it, or like you no longer can even kind of disobey orders. Being a servitor or something that's attached to the ship, it's not that great. So I guess you could see it as, how about instead of an option, it's a punishment.
So
Mm.
so I really like the direction that we're going here, and make that you answered one of my questions in advance, which is why the hell would anyone sign up for this then if
Yeah.
that were the
Yeah.
case? But it also brings up another question, which is if this is a punishment, why is the human component necessary? And secondly, what's preventing some kind of a cyborg from turning the guns on their own people who they've been punished by?
I have a feeling there's some connection to the religious component of this, since
I was thinking that as well. Yeah.
yeah, their technology of this technology is religious.
So Daniel, you'd prefer it to be like a fanatical religious aspect to it, where you're giving yourself over to the ship by like being a protector of it, essentially, right?
I mean, it doesn't have to be fanatical, but sure, that sounds interesting.
No one gives their lives without a certain level of fanaticism, Daniel. I don't think
I mean,
so,
it's
anyway.
true. I believe all those religious people are willing to give their lives for Christ. They're fanatical, but
Yeah.
it's just me.
You're not alone, I assure you. So we've kind of squared that, right?
I think so. I think it'll make sense the more we kind of figure it out.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, what else can we do to kind of is there anything else that you had in mind, Chris, or is this kind of going in the direction that you had in mind?
It's going in the direction that I had in mind, but to also add it to the fact that, say you're running out of devotees and want to literally punish someone as opposed to someone who's volunteering for like a self-flogging kind of thing, you could have it that once again it's limiting your capabilities. So think of it as like a computer. You can give yes or no answers to something or do a set run of tasks. You can't really like turn the guns out on the ship because that's not part of the firing arc.
Okay, so again, let's try and answer this question then. Why is the human component necessary here?
Well, you did say that there's a bit of collective consciousness involved. Could there be some part of this in that they're not just controlling their ship, but they're perhaps coordinating a bunch of like a fleet, and that's why they need to be connected? Like if we're trying to figure a need, or what's the need for the technology, maybe it's about coordinating the fleet, not the individual ship.
We were going over about how communication was very hard. What if this allows for the short range communication instantaneously? Granted, this could just be fixed by flags, but
Well, you
this is
can't see
much
flags
faster.
in a storm. I mean, in a storm that's super thick, you know?
Or the shutter lights.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And maybe like, because we want to keep the technology not futuristic, right? So perhaps we can select, and again, this is where I want to take a little side note here. This is where a real writer's room would have World War experts at their disposal, because then I would ask the experts and say, hey, what shortwave technology existed in this period that we could graft onto our fictional cybernetic circuit board, so that the means of communication still follows the rules, but the invention here is the cybernetic board that interfaces with the brain, because cybernetics was allowed.
Right. And from my very brief research and knowledge of this type of era, like we didn't start seeing like sophisticated technology on ships until about late 44, 45 into the future. So, you know, like and especially we're keeping it into World War I and World War II, like stuff like radar and short field communication is going to be extremely limited based on the prompt that we have right now, you know?
Yeah. So then we've got to like say, okay, the invention, the fiction of this is this network. That's the one gimme that we're basically asking for in suspension of disbelief. So it's like we're trying to say, we have this level of technology, and here's the little leap we have in the context of the story. So I'm hoping that's the way we could pull it off, you know?
Yeah, I also think that the idea of not having to communicate with so many different people all at once is actually a huge advantage. Looking at something like an Iowa class ship, it takes like anywhere between 70 to 100 and some odd crew members just to make sure that that one particular ship is operating at like full capacity. So if you have one of those that takes, you know, anywhere between 10 and 20 crew members, you know, you have one person who's cybernetically linked into this battleship. And instead of having to have all of these crew members do different things, they're targeting and they're taking up the equivalent of 10 to 12 people or 10 to 20 people. That can be a huge boon. Mm-hmm. And those people can then be doing something else elsewhere on the ship. So it could just be like a logistical issue, you know, where it's just a matter of, hey, if we have one person do this thing, it's saving a lot of time and space and efficient. It's just more efficient is what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, I like going that route because it does seem like, I feel like in this setting, there wouldn't be a major population overall. There probably wouldn't be that many kids being born. Just doesn't really seem like the setting predisposes us to that. But yeah, I like that route.
See, that actually kind of brings up an interesting question, Courtney, as well, is I imagine that the battleships that we're talking about, is that strictly a military thing? Or is that like all human life are on these battleships? Because I was thinking as well, like doing a little bit of naval research, and by naval, I mean, you know, Wikipedia, that you can have up to like 6,000 people on some of the more modern, like, cruise ships and stuff like that. So are these battleships that we're talking about, are they like running, you know, like running a naval blockade? Are they running like kind of protection duty for civilian ships? Because I think that's something that we would probably have to answer in order for us to kind of square the rest of it. Like, are these battleships strictly military, or are they also like, this is where life is, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it would have to be some just like civilian ships. And like you said, maybe that is a reason for all these battleships going around, is that they are protecting their people. It's essentially like a country, but moving in the ocean rather than a stationary spot on land.
Very Battlestar Galactica remake, which I think is kind of neat.
Yeah.
I could definitely see a flotilla of ships, but more apt for using like a crew. Well, yeah, they had cruise ships. Yeah, they were cruise ships.
Yeah.
I was thinking as well, like what might be interesting is like from a visual perspective, these battleships are so massive. Like just in real life, these things are so massive that realistically you could essentially create floating castles, right, that are protecting. So like the battleships themselves are moving castle walls, and within them are what you're trying to protect, which are the civilian population. I would also imagine that the civilian population are also trying to like gather food and other resources and create something outside of just the constant hellscape that is war.
Yeah, they would have to have some way to like farm on board or do something with like algae or kelp, I imagine.
Yeah. Overfishing, I imagine, would be like punishable by death because it's like literally, you know, controlling populations more so than others, other food production, I mean. Do we have any more tenants? I feel like we have. Daniel, I believe you have a one tenant left. Is that correct?
Yes.
I have one more as well, but you can go first, Daniel.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Daniel. Go ahead. Hit us with that last tenant that you have.
It's funny that you raised the question, Courtney, about childbirth, because my tenant says that this, whatever this toxic environment is that they live in, has led to mass infertility. And most people are either unable to breed or their offspring are born with like severe life-threatening defects that makes viability like difficult for most people.
Yeah.
So that's a possible way of restraining the population.
Question. Are those people who are born with these, you know, like tremendous birth defects, why aren't those people the first ones to go into the cybernetic pit?
Yes. As soon as you were saying that, I'm like, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Maybe they're like defects of a certain kind, and so they're actually suitable for this technology. And the cult, the religious cult, wants to further their existence.
Oh, okay. Okay. How about these like cybernetic implants are essentially iron lungs, and that's why they're strapped in all the time. It's because like, look, you're going to be trapped here anyway as a stationary person. You don't really have a life to begin with.
Yeah.
Why not do your duty? You know, like provide a service for your people and you'll continue to live.
Keep the grid alive. Yeah.
Yeah.
That also makes it less kind of like the futuristic or modern view of cyberpunk and more like meat in a can kind of cyberpunk.
Exactly. And that's also partially why I wanted to keep it like that. So now it's not like we're jacking into the web. It's like, no, you're stuck in a fucking iron lung.
Red light beep, I load canister.
Exactly. Yes. It's like only it's like binary kind of interface. There's very little data or information passing.
Very primitive to us.
It switches. Just basic switches.
You want your nutrient paste today? Then load the shells faster.
It's horrifying.
Although, to be fair, it's funny you should mention the shells, Chris. I think that loading shells in particular is something that would still have to be done by like physical crew people. I think that that's something that, because the technology that we're working with, I can't see that being automated, you know?
Well, are we saying mainly that the cybernetic interface is really about communicating between ships? It doesn't really do much for the actual ship.
What do you mean?
Coordination.
What do you mean by that, Daniel? Can you...
Like, it seems like we were saying that the people who are hooked into these things, like, it's not like they're controlling parts of the ship. They're meant to bolster a larger fleet network in order to communicate through the storm. So that's their way. It's their communication system, sort of.
Oh, I was thinking just communication within the ship itself. Like, to ensure that everything goes well on one individual ship requires a massive amount of crew people. Just through communication and physically moving munitions and other supplies around, it takes a huge crew. And to reduce that, to cut that down, it makes you safer and it makes everything more efficient.
So you see them as like a ship's computer, basically. Like they're able to.
They're living computers, essentially, is what they are. And I would even say that you would probably need more than one to communicate within one ship. Okay. Because if we're talking about particular battleships, right, these are typically 900 feet long. So even with like a living computer inside and trapped in these iron lungs, I'm imagining that you probably need 4 to 6 of them just for a single ship to run efficiently.
Oh, idea.
Go ahead.
The oil rig base, I imagine it also has these people on it, and I imagine it has a lot of them. And I wonder if the more you have, the more range you have to communicate. So when you approach the oil rig thing, at a certain distance, your ships are able to communicate with it because there's so many of those interfaced people on it.
It's like a psychic hive mind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when people speak, they're all speaking at once or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That is fucking horrifying, and I'm totally into it. Yeah. Okay. That sounds amazing. I like
But
that
they're
a
also
lot.
saying such mundane things. It's still horrifying. Just like, you
Yeah.
are approved for docking bay 3.
Yeah.
It's a chorus of people.
Chris, horror is found in mundanity. Let's be real. That's really where the deep horror comes from when you're facing existence and it's a paperclip. That's scarier than a fucking knife edge. I swear to you.
I will show you fear in a handful of dust.
There you go.
I mean, this is also complicated by the fact that these interfaced people are children, or at least were.
Ooh, yeah.
That's true. They've essentially, all they've ever known is this life within the Iron Lung, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's something similar to that in N.K. Jemisin's The Fifth Season, but it's worse in the fifth season, I would say. But definitely similar vibes.
Worse as in more horrifying, or as in just like, okay, gotcha.
Yes.
I imagine that's some kind of massive spoiler that we don't want to let out. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess we could leave it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
With that in mind, Courtney, you have your final tenet left. So why don't you start us off and bring us into the apocalypse? Go ahead.
Sure. So to add another like horrific element to the environment itself, I was thinking that naval mines would be a key part of defensive like walls, essentially.
Oh yeah.
But kind of going back to how we talked about these horrible storms and kind of everything being moved around, and I'm wondering if like the mines are more of a thing of the past that have now been sort of banned or are now looked down upon if you use them, just because of how much damage they can cause. Because if you just leave one, it could end up being like picked up by a huge storm and like slamming into some innocent civilian ship or something like that.
That's a really good point. Do we want to also make that umbrella into submersibles or like submarines as well?
Yeah.
Because, like maybe like submarines are essentially like illegal because of how effective and how deadly they can be to these giant ships.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
can we add a religious element to that?
How?
So I'm wondering if the submarines, because I get banning them would make sense, but how do you do that? So I'm wondering maybe there's something about submarines that's connected to their religion, and there's a reason why they don't do it too, because of that, beyond it being dangerous.
Just maybe it's some sort of superstition about like the nature of being underwater or secretive. Like there's some superstition around that.
I like that, because then it's like it's not only the law, because it seems like a kind of world that's hard to police. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the self-policing of religion is effective.
So I think that there is something to be said there, Daniel, because I don't necessarily think that we need a superstitious element to this, because we have nuclear weapons in our own timeline, but we don't really use them for, reasons that are, if one person started using them, everyone would start using them. It's mutually assured to self-destruction, right?
Were we talking about submarines or nuclear weapons?
Submarines. But I'm suggesting that in this world, submarines are no different than nuclear weapons. Like there's a reason that we don't use them, and it's because we don't want to destroy ourselves in the process.
I guess I just don't see how they would be that dangerous unless it's because they can explode.
Submarines are notorious ship killers. Like they are besides planes, they are the most dangerous thing. They got America into World War I through the sinking of the Lusitania. Like they are incredibly dangerous to ships, and they are like.
Are you seeing them as like because the ship is basically like a continent now, so taking the ship down is like killing tons of people So in a sense, the
Yeah.
submarine is a weapon of mass destruction.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think that when you look at the submarine and how deadly and how effective it is, I think that the floating nations of the world look at that and they've all made a kind of like gentleman's agreement not to use this technology because it would mean that everyone would die.
So I like that. I definitely buy that. I guess those gentlemen though, and this is usually the case, I think, with religions, is that they cloak their strategic, practical concerns in religious ideology to reinforce them. So I could see those gentlemen saying among each other, we can't use these because they're weapons of mass destruction and we live on these boats. But to the people at large, creating a faith about that, which is what Cordy was suggesting, like in terms of them being, the deep is dangerous and, like, we don't trust the waters.
Like something about like, if you go too deep, like something down there will change you and you'll no longer be like a real human.
Wow, I think that's really a sex negative message that we don't want to send.
I actually like how this could then make, because assuming that this is a post-apocalyptic world as we have been, there were nations or people who were on submarines, and they're not just going to be like, all right, screw it, I guess submarines aren't cool now, which means I feel like there would be a whole other faction that is nothing but submarines that don't want to be hunted to extinction.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like this opens up a door for like a pirate kind of faction.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? Ooh, with the diving suits. Dwarf diving suits. I'm on board. They're not dwarves, though. They're just tiny to fit on subs.
Yeah, you actually do need to be short to fit on submarines. That's part of the thing. But so I like the idea of introducing a level of gradation here where maybe the religious aspect is it's a subcategory or a subgroup that has this, ideation of submarines, right? Like not everyone believes that submarines are, like the literal devil, but there's enough religious fervor to where there is a sub-faction of people who absolutely believe that submarines are the devil.
They don't even see it as people on those ships. They believe it's creatures on the ship kind of thing.
That might be fun too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because usually you have a really vocal minority that drowns out everyone else. And even though they may not be widely believed, they've done damage already. Like they put the idea in people's minds. So at the back of their minds, they think something negative about the submarine.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I believe that's everyone's tenets. Is that correct? All right. So now we move on to the world building anchor, where we already have kind of Polaris, the city, the floating city, which is like essentially the navigational star. Now let's see what else we make through this because whatever we make is going to be incredibly important to the setting. So let's grab my dice and roll some dice and see what happens. So the thing that we're going to be focusing on for the anchor is going to be, the anchor for this setting is going to be a hero, which I think is really interesting, especially considering we're building like multitudinous factions here, right? So the theme surrounding this hero, hopefully this will square it a little bit, maybe we can get like heroic sacrifice or something, is going to be mystery. Okay. So we have a hero whose theme is mystery. What are we thinking for this setting?
I guess we have to ask where does the hero come from? Is he on a submarine? Is he in the base? Is he on a boat?
Well, one thing I would imagine, because if we're creating multiple factions here, I would I would assume that this would be a hero to all factions, not just an individual one. So I think that we should start there with a fairly difficult premise and understand why this particular person is seen as fairly universally good.
But where is he? That's what I'm asking.
See, in my mind, he's dead. Because he's essentially like a hero whose legacy is the thing that holds this world together. But I could be wrong. I'm open to suggestions, but that's where my brain immediately goes to.
I could see it as the way that it entered into a lot of this armistice where it's not all out war, maybe, was caused by this one person.
That's a good idea. Also, Daniel, I recognize now when you said, where is this hero? The theme is mystery. Maybe the hero is missing.
Oh,
Mm.
okay. I like that.
Mhm.
So he's missing, and he was responsible for the armistice between various factions.
I think that's a good starting point for sure. Yeah. So this person's name is, their first name is Red, last name October. And
Are they regular crewmen? Are they one of those cybernetic children?
I'm thinking a regular crew person
Mhm.
with like, I don't know why I have this in mind that this person's a scientist, not necessarily a diplomat, you know?
Could they have been one of the children who actually survived childbirth, since there's not very many there's children just don't happen because people are infertile?
Okay. Okay.
Or so I have two thoughts relating to like the scientist route. One could be he was primarily responsible for the wind power, harnessing that, or alternatively, he had been working on fertility treatments that allowed for more population growth.
That's
Courtney,
actually what I had in mind, Courtney.
Yeah.
That's
What if-
exactly what I wanted to go with. Yes.
Okay.
What if she
Mhm.
was working on herself and she's pregnant?
Okay, so here's what I want. Here's one of the things that I really want to explore, because this is the thing that we've been talking a lot about recently, which is the implication, right? So the implication with the infertility and this scientist hero becoming like essentially creating drugs or treatment that allow for fertility to happen. Holy shit, let's be real and talk about what that means, because one, you're creating eugenics at that point. And more importantly, you're creating capitalist eugenics, because it's no longer about who is breeding, because that's kind of a general thing, but it's like who has enough money to successfully breed is what happens when we have this type of technology and this type of thing. That's one thing that I really wanted to like focus on, because to me, I see that as a natural extension and a natural progression as something that could happen in this world.
The only
And
thing
yes,
I'm
it's
not,
fucking horrifying, I think, but yeah.
the only thing I'm not I'm so confused on is only the capitalism angle of this, is because I don't really see in this world a very coherent capitalist structure, I guess, because I'm sure there's trade between these boats and such, but whatever we had as an apparatus for business is probably dissolved to some extent if this is like Waterworld. And so what I was thinking about, what the images that go to mind when I hear fertility treatments, I'm thinking like children of men, although that
Yeah.
definitely had like a like they were trying to get it to an organization that could then continue the work. There was still like capitalism at work. So I'm wondering, like, what's the value then of the fertility treatment? Is it like this is humanity's salvation, or is it like you're saying this is something that can be sold and then controlled in a nefarious way? So I guess it points to what's the theme here. Like, are we taking, we're in a post-apocalypse, are we taking it towards an angle of like grimdark, or are we going like hope punk? Like, what direction is this
I
going?
feel like it could even depend on the faction, like how they use the technology that was developed. Maybe even like that sort of oil rig Polaris station. Maybe that is more capitalistic in a way, because it's been able to kind of stay in one place and stay situated as this like big hub. But maybe the more nomadic groups are more communal in how they work,
More like
and maybe
a Dune, sort of the Bene Gesserit situation.
Maybe the reason this hero is missing is because they understand the implication. Maybe they understand what's going to happen once they start selling, they start selling fertility as a product. Once you start commodifying it, you know what I mean?
Or maybe they were working on Polaris and realized that that area might not be the best place to release this technology because
I
of
like
that
that.
implication. So maybe that's why they left. And
They fled on
yeah.
a submarine.
Ooh.
Oh, there you go.
Nice.
And not only that,
Constantly
but
want
like,
that taboo.
their mission is benevolent because they're trying to take that power away from centralized groups and to democratize it again.
Mhm.
They're trying to make it as it once was, like in the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that would point back to what you're saying, Rob, is if there's a fragment of the old wants to commoditize, like among the leadership who have manufactured this religion, perhaps, this person who works for them in some capacity understands that and realizes that this cure to infertility is bigger than, the oil rig station Polaris. It's for the sake of humanity. So it sounds like then we're going in the direction of like bigger stakes, world saving, possible hope.
Yeah, I could see it as the problem with them is, especially with the communication being the way that it is, they want this treatment or this ability to be given to everyone simultaneously, because if one person were to get it or one person were to hoard it, it would cause either a power imbalance. And also, right now, with fertility being what it is, life is seen as more sacred, as opposed to if it was just like putting people into vats and getting like generation after generation. They know that if there's another big conflict, they might be completely wiped out.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me.
Okay. Guys, I'm actually really excited. I feel like we've dug down and we found some really cool stuff here. I'm really, really excited to see where this setting goes.
I just love when we can like visualize some of this. Like I can visualize the Polaris station. I can visualize docking at it and hearing all those voices like you guys were saying. I can visualize the scientists trying to sneak away and get into whatever exit port, like all of that I could see, which I think is really cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, regrettably, here is where we throw a monkey wrench into everything and we roll the twist for the setting. And I have to say, I'm actually kind of scared for this one because if it's something like, anyway, I'm just going to roll for the twist and we'll see what happens. All right.
All right.
And our twist is it's a trap. There's a
but
lot,
it's fitting.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we can do here with this idea. So let's keep that in mind as we roll into our next episode next week. So that'll do it for this episode of World Build with us. If you liked this podcast, go ahead and submit your own prompt. We want you to do this. This is how our podcast lives, breathes, and dies, is with prompts submitted by users like you. So you can do that by going to worldbuildwithus.com, clicking on the submit prompt button, and filling out all the information. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at Let's World Build. You can also join our Discord community with a link for that into the description. And if you really liked this, really liked this podcast, you could always give us money over on Patreon. And remember that we love you very much. We're going to get through this together. Until next week.